Welcome to the latest in a series of development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. This webinar, Making Change Work, is delivered in collaboration between the NIHR Academy and Capfinity, one of our leadership development programme partners who currently deliver the Future Focus Leadership Programme. This webinar will be facilitated by Steph Hopper, Director of Development Solutions at Capfinity. Steph, I'll now hand over to you.
Thank you, Holly. Welcome to Making Change Work. I'd like to start the session by exploring the idea of change, but to do it in an interactive way. Most of you, I guess, are sat looking at your screen, probably a computer screen, with a mouse either to the left or the right-hand side of you. Maybe some of you have got a touchpad on your laptop. What I'd love everyone to do is to move their mouse to the opposite side. So, you know, if you've got it on the left-hand side, move it to the right. If you've got it on the right, move it to the left. If you're using a touchpad, maybe look to use your non-dominant hand, because I suspect you typically will use your usual writing hand on the touchpad. In the middle of the screen, you should have chat, raise hand, and Q&A. What I'd love you to do now is just with your hand on the wrong side, try raising your hand and just see if it will let you raise your hand on Zoom. Actually, do you know what? I think the raise hand function may be turned off, so that won't be possible. Anyway, hopefully you get the message that I'm trying to deliver here, which is when we move the mouse to the other side, actually we've simulated that feeling of change. It's a bit like when you walk out of the airport in another country and you're driving on the wrong side of the road. And, you know, you've got to really focus. I always think that my husband takes off out of the airport far too quickly in those first few minutes and everything feels a bit alien. I guess unless you're part of the 1% of us who are ambidextrous, you probably found it a bit awkward when I said move your mouse over, and it was probably even more awkward when we discovered the hands up button wasn't there, but kind of uncomfortable, I guess, at best. So why did we do that, and what has it shown us? This webinar is about making change work, and when we think of change, we often think of it in this way, a move from one way of doing things to another. In this context, asking people to move their mouse from one side to another seems like an oversimplification, but this is a common approach to making change work. We identify the change, we communicate what we need, and we sit back and we think, let's see if it sticks. In this webinar, we want to explore what real impactful change management looks like and introduce 2 practical tools to support you in finding success in making change work. Without a transition, a change is just a rearrangement of the furniture. Unless transition happens, the change won't work because it doesn't take. This quote is from William Bridges, a renowned authority on change and transition, who spent his career transforming the way people think about change. His pioneering research into the role of transitions in change still works as a methodology to guide organisations and individuals. For example, the mouse move experiment we just did was as literally moving the furniture. And I'd hypothesise that all of you have moved your mouse back to where you started with it. The change didn't take. And why is that? I guess for Bridges, the most important element of change was the moment between the old way and the new way. This middle bit is the transition. It's the key aspect, often undervalued when exploring change processes. So what's the difference then between change and transition? Change is situational and external. It's the new site, the new boss, the new job, the new team roles, the new structure, the new process, the new project. Whereas transition is internal. It's the psychological process people go through to come to terms with the new situation. If we want to bring people along with us on a change and make sure the changes take, they are long-lasting and impactful, we need to bear this in mind. Let's have a look now at our own reactions to change. So I'm going to share with you a poll, and I'm going to ask you to think about what your response would be. It's a series of questions all related to change, which I'm sharing on the slide now. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond. Just launch the poll now. Your answers must simply be yes, no, or maybe. So So things like, would you avoid change if you could? Are you fearless when you need to be? Do you give up if you try something new and don't see immediate results? Learning something new is appealing to me. I am able to accept failure easily. The uncertainty of the future worries me. The way we live and work will look very different in 5 years' time. I know where I want to be in 5 years and how to get there. Thank you. I can see a few of you have responded. I'll just give you another 15 seconds and we'll bring the poll to an end and have a look at our results. Great. Okay, that's fantastic. Right, let's now have a look at those questions that I just asked you. I hope that was a good opportunity to think about your responses to change and how you react to change. It wasn't a random poll. It's been delivered to a number of people so far as part of a change perception index and a luck readiness index, all conducted by Professor Jim Bright, an organisational psychologist. The green bubbles on the slide highlight when the left-hand side had a higher response, and the pink bubbles highlight the highest response to the right. Haven't bothered including the maybes on the results here. But the first one is, would you avoid change if you could? And actually, of us who are attending the webinar today, 17% of us said we would avoid change, and 57% emphatically said we would not avoid change. 27% are kind of in the maybe, probably a bit tired of maybe some of the change we've had this year already. And actually, if we just jump down, so basically what we're saying here is 34% of respondents, agreed with that sentiment. So they would avoid change if they could. So 2/3 of us are saying we're up for it. And that's roughly what we've said too. But if you look a bit further down, almost 9 out of 10 people, number 7, believe their lives will be very different in 5 years' time. And actually, it's quite funny, but this survey is 5 years old, so they were spot on. And we are very similar. So 90% of us have said that, we believe our lives will be different in 5 years' time. So we kind of correlate with the answers that are there. But this poses a big question. How do you reconcile the fact that 1 in 3 of us would avoid change if we could, yet 9 out of 10 of us see change as definitely present in our future lives? What's your role in making a difference? How important is a manager's involvement in the change effort? Let's look at that now. This question was asked in a 2016 study, and the results found that 84% of participants ranked their manager or supervisor's involvement in a change initiative as extremely important or very important to the success of the project. However, a Willis Towers Watson study found that only 2/3 of senior managers say they get to understand the reasons behind major organisational decisions. And this problem gets worse as you begin to go down the organisation. So below the senior management level, only half of middle managers and 40% of first-line managers say that their managers do a good job of explaining the reasons behind major decisions. Perhaps confirming writer George Bernard Shaw's belief that the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion it's taken place. From this point on, we want to introduce to you 2 tools which can help overcome these challenges and how to ensure we've got the information we need to plan a change as managers and how to successfully communicate and implement the change. So, the first tool is a change process. I think this visual, this cartoon, brings to life the challenge for many of us when we're introducing a change. We know where we are now and we know where we need to get to, but the middle part is a bit sketchy, a bit vague. It's a bit more art than science, I guess. And what we need is a practical tool to support us finding that missing middle. And that's where this process can come in, the theory of change. It's focused in particular on mapping out the missing middle between what a programme or a change initiative does, so its activities and its interventions, and how those lead to the sort of desired goals being achieved. A theory of change is a process tool to help you describe the need you're trying to address, the changes you want to make, so your outcomes, and what you plan to do, your activities. The approach is used by organisations of all shapes and sizes, from service delivery charities to campaigning organisations to funding organisations. A theory of change is often represented in a diagram or a chart, but the full process involves much more than this. It should help you consider and articulate the assumptions that surround your work and explain why you think your activities will lead to the outcomes you want. It should also challenge you to develop clear aims and strategies and explore whether your plans are supported by evidence. By the end of a theory of change process, you should have a clear idea of what your organisation or your project wants to achieve, and also a strategy to get there. There's an abundance of theory of change resources available to support you adopting this, and we'll send a link to some of them after this session. However, process is just one part of what makes change work. We now need to move on to the second challenge, which is how to communicate and get others on board and want to transition to the new way. Transition needs to explore to the emotional appeal. It needs to be inclusive and is often built with the input of those it impacts. People change what they do less because they are given analysis that shifts their thinking than because they are shown a truth that influences their feelings. This quote is by John Cotter. He's a world-leading expert in change management. What he's getting at is that too often change programs are based on the premise that a small number of people can see the outcomes that are needed, the change process can be controlled in some way, and that everyone else involved has a neutral starting point in the process. Let's just think about a specific situation. And I had to think hard about this, but I changed my mind on a big decision 4.5 years ago. My husband was concerned I needed to live closer to my parents. And in the longer term, he was encouraging me to consider this before we had to apply for schools for my daughter. I remember on paper it made perfect sense. We'd moved closer to them. They were of an age where they needed support. I didn't have siblings, and their plan to move closer to us had fallen through. Somehow, though, I just wasn't convinced. I didn't want to leave where we were. There were lots of things I liked about where I was, and I was cementing lots of really good friendships, and I could see a future there very closely. I could see building a future there. I remember my husband tentatively putting plans in place at each stage. Why don't we just fix up this bit of the house so that it's kind of ready to go on the market? Tell you what, why don't we put it on the market? We don't have to sell it. We'll just see if we get any interest. We might not even be able to sell it. So there was all these logical steps that my brain could handle, but I felt enormous resistance internally. The house actually went on the market when we were away on holiday, and we quickly accepted an offer. And then I felt really anxious and unsure. What were we doing? This was kind of quite scary. And I remember really clearly the moment my mind changed though. As we got back from holiday, we came to the area where my parents lived, and we looked at some potential houses that we might want to buy. To this day, I remember being on the main shopping street near where my parents were and suddenly realising it was the right thing. I felt excited about living in the area and knowing it was what I needed to do. It was like my heart had caught up with my logical brain. All the logical steps that my brain had seen suddenly now were supported by that emotional connection I had. I knew that day I was going to be happy to move, and it was the right thing to do. Somewhere in that story, I think we can see that my transition happened when I experienced part of the change by visiting the areas and seeing potential homes we could live in. So the logical planning for my husband came first, and once my heart became engaged with the change and I experienced a sort of sample of it, I caught up. So we can successfully plan a change with something like the theory of change, but we really have to help people get that transition on side and make that stick. And we need to focus on hearts and minds to do it. I'm wondering if you can think about the last time you changed someone's mind, or indeed when you last changed your mind. Changing other people's minds can be a surprisingly difficult thing to do. Think about using your mouse at the beginning of this webinar on the wrong side. How awkward that felt and how hard it would be to make a change like that permanent without good reason. and without some practice and a bit of time. People's responses to change can be really surprising. I always love the example of the desk move, as universally most of us will have experienced that in a place of work. I've always found it's one of the most emotive subjects at work. It doesn't need to have any connection with any sort of restructure or, different responsibilities that people are taking on. Simply being told you're moving to a different part of a floor or an office can trigger a really kind of quite disproportionate emotional response. Many managers or leaders, I don't think, preempt how hard that transition can be, and the impact on engagement can be felt more broadly. People don't like sitting under the air conditioning unit or being further away from the kitchen, or there's more noise or less noise, or different people, they're missing out on maybe some of the informal connections they normally build. I mean, the list is endless of objections that we can face, and surprisingly common, regardless of what sort of industry that that we would work in. Once again, it's not the change, but the transition that does us in. Psychology has identified a number of triggers which can influence our behaviour. One is the influence of others, which I think probably is something we've all thought a lot about through these times of the global pandemic. We're social animals, and we're often vulnerable to comparison to those around us. This is something that I think is really impacting us at the moment, noticing how friends and family are responded to changes and restrictions that are going on. A friend of mine who in lockdown was super, super cautious, she's in Cardiff. I remember speaking to her and she was kind of barely leaving her house. She was asthmatic. I would say she was on the pretty much very sensible, very cautious end of the scale. And then in the summer on Instagram, I suddenly saw a photo pop up which said, Les vacances. And I was like, oh, you're in France. And my whole kind of, thinking changed on where her head was at. And yes, indeed, she'd gone to France. Various restrictions around how she'd got there, but she had gone. Businesses use the influence of others to their advantage. If you think about online reviews, so the 5-star reviews that Amazon's always looking for us to write up, or, just the impact of, I'm sure some of us will have stood in a queue, probably outside a nightclub at some stage in our lives, and then gone inside the nightclub to find there's no one inside. How those can influence us. Apple love a queue outside their shops, don't they? Again, influence us thinking, what is it that we're missing out on? What we do know is some people, though, have more impact on us than others. They're the key influencers, and they're the people we need to think about when we're trying to make change happen. Let's look at them now. Research across multiple organisations has identified that typically it's only 3% of employees who act as key influencers. It's 3% who drive conversations with 85% of the other employees. They're quite a powerful group for us to identify. And it's an important thing for us to understand when we implement different changes. We should avoid a one-size-fits-all. We need to be strategic, and we need to think about how we approach people and understand what it is that's important to them and the influence they have over others. So maybe my husband would have done well to find a key influencer in my world, and maybe my transition would have been a bit quicker and not quite so painful. In organisations, it is great if we can spot who that key influencer could be for us, as they will help others get on side, as more than anything, they're going to demonstrate they're getting on with it and they're adopting the new process and approach that we're implementing. Therefore, our change goals need to connect with people's intrinsic motivation and values. This next tool is designed to support the creation of those change messages, helping to get others on board from the ground up. It's crucial to connect with people's emotions, their hearts, and their minds. So this second tool is the SCARF model. David Rock, director of the Neuro Leadership Institute, developed the SCARF model to explain the 5 factors that the brain is always monitoring. These are what we need to keep in mind during change management. Research by his institute found the human brain is hardwired to respond to 5 key social needs, which are as follows. First of all, status, the perception of being considered better or worse than others. Secondly, certainty, our understanding of the clarity of future events. Thirdly, autonomy, the level of control we feel over our current situation. Fourth is relatedness, the sense of feeling safe and included in what is happening. And fifth is fairness, a sense that the change is just and respectful. In summary, we walk toward rewards when these 5 needs are met, and we run away from threats when one of those 5 needs is not met. So we're going to go through SCARF now. Some of my slides have some practical ideas for future reference. I'm not just going to read them all out to you, so I won't necessarily cover every single point on the tips, but we're going to share those slides with you afterwards for you to reflect on. Let's start with status. There are going to be some changes and there's nothing to worry about. Something we've probably all heard at some point or another. The context could vary enormously for us depending on who's delivering this message and what they're referring to. But generally we find that this is the communication equivalent of don't think about a pink elephant. As soon as we hear the word worry, our brain focuses on that. See, I know you're all fixated on a pink elephant right now. So why does this matter? It matters because when we're in a position of authority as a leader or a manager, we will have heard some of the change news ahead of our team members, which automatically means we're very likely to be further along the change curve. Perhaps we've come to terms with the change. Perhaps we've been through a crisis already and we've spoken to a peer about it. We know we don't need to worry as we've had time to think about it. So what does this have to do with status? Well, the fact we're in a position which gives us the power of information and perhaps authority as well over those we're communicating with draws attention to the difference between ourselves and those we are speaking to. So be mindful of your position of privilege and your status, and how a simple message like, there's nothing to worry about, can actually be really disconcerting for the other person. Status matters to us. Several studies on the brain have shown how the human brain is focused on minimizing danger and maximizing reward. Brain scanning has shown the human brain is socially tuned and social threats and rewards drive our behavior. In fact, a study by University of Michigan Medical School highlighted how social pain, such as rejection from a group, causes the same regions of the brain to light up as would in the event of physical pain. I'm trying to make my daughter understand that about playground antics, but it's not easy. So if we think about a situation where someone has been included in a series of meetings with peers, perhaps as part of a committee, they feel part of that group and they feel of a similar level of importance to everyone in that group. This is satisfying their need for status. It sends them a message, perhaps implicitly, that they are important. If they were then told that they're no longer required to be part of that group, there's been a change in focus for the committee perhaps, then that can trigger that social pain that Michigan Medical School found in their research. It makes them feel less important and excluded. I remember much earlier in my career, many years ago, before I joined Capfinity, being in a position where I was part of a team selling a product that just didn't work. And it didn't matter what noise we made to the managers above us, or what suggestions we made, or what complaints from customers we escalated. We just couldn't get things better. And we were kind of really baffled by this. Everything was delayed in terms of development. Nothing was ever changing. Everything was a false promise. It was only when I got the opportunity to attend an event where the CEO was there. It was a FTSE 100 company and it was unusual to get to meet the CEO. And I remember I said to my team, if I get to meet him, I'm going to ask him a question. I'm going to put him on the spot, because we'd had like 9 months of agony. And I remember as soon as I asked the question about the lack of the roadmap for this product, suddenly the truth was revealed. An investment decision had been made 6 months earlier to not work on that product, as the funds were needed for a confidential transaction. But they had not wanted to communicate that to us at that time. And in some ways, I think it had just kind of gone off the boil for them, and they'd never really got back to telling us the reason. I remember myself and my colleagues feeling such a relief that we knew what was going on. It was like we felt crazy in our heads that, this wasn't happening, and suddenly we could see why. And it felt like a shift from a kind of parent-child communication to adult-adult. Okay, we're not going to be at the same level of status as the CEO, but suddenly we had people engage with us and giving us the answers. We felt part of the dialogue. And to this day, I wonder if there was a different way that could have been handled and could have been dealt with. And that links to something else to consider. When we share new information with others, it's really helpful to use we instead of I. It's a real subtle little change, but it helps people receive the information as if it's something you're owning with them, and it prevents them feeling like there's this distance between you and reinforcing that you may be of a different status or level to them. Let's move on to another element of the SCARF model, and certainty is the next part to be aware of. Our brains are pattern recognition machines, which are constantly trying to predict the next thing. The brain likes to know the pattern occurring moment to moment. It craves certainty so that prediction is possible. Examples are everywhere in daily life. Music that has simple repeating patterns is kind of rewarding because of the ability to predict the flow of information. Even a small amount of uncertainty generates an error response in the frontal cortex. This takes attention away from one's goals, forcing attention to the error. For example, how many of you now are staring at this slide, trying to work out the pattern of the numbers? Is the sequence wrong, you're thinking? Have you missed something? Is it a trick? To reassure you, these are actually just random numbers to illustrate that point. Larger uncertainties, like not knowing maybe your boss's expectations of you, or if your job is secure, or if the funding has come through, can be highly debilitating. The act of creating a sense of certainty is rewarding. When we know what to expect, we feel safe. When we're uncertain about a situation, we put all of our energy in trying to make sense of what's going on around us. Sometimes a bit of uncertainty kind of keeps us sharp and on our toes, but too much can lead to us feeling disengaged and, ultimately can affect our performance. Practical things we need to think about to ensure we take certainty into account. When we're planning, think about the wider impact of the change and areas of ambiguity where you perhaps don't have clarity. For instance, if we're waiting to hear about various sources of funding, perhaps there's some scenarios you can go through with those impacted about the bigger picture, if perhaps all the grants don't come in. Secondly, when communicating, be as authentic and open as you're able to about what's likely to be ahead. Be honest where you don't have the answers. This is often the hardest part, having to say you don't know, but people will respect you in the long run. Okay, let's move on. I've got a hypothetical question for you. And what I'm going to do is ask you in a minute in the chat box to vote on these two questions. So I'm just going to open the chat box so that you can respond. But what I would love you to tell me is, there we go. If you were, which world would you rather live in? So would you rather live in world A, you're paid £100,000 a year, but everyone else is paid more, and they're paid £130,000 a year? Or would you rather live in world B? So you're paid £75,000 a year, so less than in world A, but everyone else is paid less than you. They all get £50,000 a year. So perhaps you'd like to open your chat window. Just give me an A or a B. What do you think? Would you rather be earning less than everyone else, or would you rather ultimately be earning more than everyone else? Which one would you prefer? Great, thank you. Well, I am seeing a flurry of Bs, a few As. Great, lots. It looks like a fairly emphatic response, lots of Bs. Keith and Anne-Marie, you're on the As, that's great. Bs there, brilliant. Okay, so when asked this question in a study, people actually said they were more likely to want to live in world B. So in summary, we'd rather earn less money overall, but live in a world, we would rather earn less money overall than live in a world where we earn less than those around us. And I guess this brings to life 3 of the SCARF principles. Quite possibly, you've probably gone through a pattern of thinking that was something along the lines of, world A obviously threatens our sense of status. We don't want to be the poorest. But then I suppose the whole test opens us up to feeling vulnerable to all that is kind of uncertain in these worlds. So you probably really want to ask me a load of questions like, will other people know I earn less? Will everything cost the same as it does now? Will it really apply to everyone in the whole world? And then possibly at some point you might have questioned the fairness of these worlds, or even us asking you the question, does either world seem fair and just? And fairness is another element of the SCARF model. When it comes to fairness, various studies from UCLA show the human brain responds to being treated fairly the same way it responds to winning money and eating chocolate. In one study, participants who were offered 50 cents from a total of $1 generated more of a reward in the brain than an offer of $10 from 50. The brain works on a concept of fairness which isn't necessarily always rational. In the workplace, fairness often is associated with hypocrisy and inconsistency. It's like the feeling that perhaps there are different rules for different people. One way to overcome that is to ensure that the why is front and centre. Improving transparency and increasing the quantity and quality of communication will always have a positive impact. Leaders who are able to be open about what is going on and why the organisation is working in a specific way will find it much easier to bring people with them. A great example of someone who communicated this well in the past was from a leadership team that I worked with in a small growing organisation. They used the terms justice and mercy to describe a transition they were going through to introduce more process and ultimately a HR rulebook. Let me explain it a bit further. So whilst they were a small team, originally they felt they could show mercy when responding to employee issues, i.e. everyone understood that sometimes special treatment of one person was required and the leaders felt able to make those judgments on a situation by situation basis. This was fine when the whole company could gather around one table and the CEO had a personal relationship with everybody there. But as you can imagine, that didn't really work as they began to grow. It wasn't sustainable and it created tension, especially as they realised they needed to really switch away from this idea of a situation by situation response. So this was where they made the transition, as they described it, from mercy to justice. Justice represented one rule for everybody. And although it was going to be consistent, what they said was, we know that it won't always seem fair, as actually there are likely to be exceptions it didn't work for, as actually what suits one person probably doesn't suit someone else. So always think about fairness when we're considering the SCARF model. To lead us into the last two parts of the SCARF model, let's look at the typical types of managers or leaders of change. They're drawn from the work of psychologist Harry Hans that he's completed on change leaders in healthcare. Hans found the system typically creates lone wolves, those who build power by expertise and information through advocacy, oversight, contributing to committees, public comments, and other forms of consultation. However, Hans' research found that this type of leader didn't really lead the most effective changes. To get the results needed, leaders needed to be a combination of the other two types, mobilisers and organisers. Those manager-leader types are more likely to incorporate the ideas of those around them, include others in developing plans, and build champions around them. Why is that important? I guess one of the reasons we've introduced SCARF is the importance of connecting with hearts of those involved, not just heads. And the lone wolf leader is probably someone a lot of us have encountered. Perhaps a promising young clinician who's been plucked from their clinical practice and given a big management role without a strong peer group or a support system. Their distance, need to know communicate style, and specialist knowledge or expertise can make them difficult to trust. Will they think about the impact of their decisions on other people? Will they let others influence their ideas? Trust is built in many ways, and recent studies have linked the release of oxytocin in the brain. Swapping names, eye contact, discussing something in common like the weather, all may increase a feeling of closeness and can release oxytocin. Interestingly, the effect of oxytocin on trust is not due to a general increase to take risks, but affects an individual's willingness to accept risks because of their interpersonal interactions. In other words, lone wolves struggle to lead on changes because they focus on heads and not on hearts. Connecting to hearts means creating a perception of trust and control. Let's see how that links now to the last two elements of the SCARF model. Relatedness and autonomy. The sense of feeling included and like we have control over a situation is huge. And actually, both of these are key ingredients which drive intrinsic motivation. We have just touched on the importance of trust when we looked at the challenge the lone wolves have. The concept of relatedness, another element of the SCARF model, is closely linked to trust. And remember, trust is built in many ways and causes the brain to make that release of oxytocin, which increases our feeling of closeness to one another. We're most likely to trust those who appear to be in our group, maybe have some similarities with us, or with those we have connected with and exchanged pleasantries with, which sort of generate approach emotions. A study of software engineers in Silicon Valley found that those who connected with others and helped them with their projects not only earned the respect and trust of their peers, but were more productive themselves. So think about how much trust already exists between yourself and the audience you're communicating with, because when we experience something untrustworthy, we will usually withdraw. Another factor is the way in which we communicate. If someone says to us, "Can I speak to you?" this can feel like a loaded question if the other person doesn't know what it is you're going to discuss with them, which may be nothing at all concerning. You might be inquiring how they are, or could be something really serious that they should worry about. When communicating with a group and feeling nervous, something that I see a lot of leaders fall into the trap of is feeling the need to build up a key message, maybe have a long preamble about their kind of hopes and dreams or what got us to this place. The problem is, if people know the announcement or the communication regards some form of change, it's likely most of the audience won't hear that build up at all. They're just waiting for the punchline. And it creates a sense of unease. So the more open we can be, the more clear in our communication, the more our audience will feel connected with you and willing to take on board what you are saying. I know when I've had to deliver difficult messages, perhaps for team members, perhaps it's around team members being made redundant or cancellations of a big project, I've always thought about my key message, and I sort of ensured I've shared it without too much small talk, which isn't my natural style, but I feel it's really important to get that message out quickly and then create a space for people to react or discuss. This will vary depending on what the change is, and I've used a couple of extreme examples there, which are probably on the harder end of the scale, as they tend to be the ones which we get more nervous about as managers and leaders. The other thing to consider in your communication is how transparent can you be? I think it's one of the biggest challenges as a manager or a leader. Frequently, we're not able to share all the details we would like to share immediately, or we may have information we're not allowed to pass on at all. So how can we deliver a message that we can get behind, which helps our team to trust us and stay connected? The other element of this model is autonomy. So autonomy relates to control. The danger is we can feel a strong need to micromanage every inch of this change, especially if we feel responsible. But that's a surefire route to block autonomy. I feel like the entire world has engineered an experiment in autonomy this year. Any workplace that couldn't imagine enabling staff to work from home previously and said, sorry, that's just not what we do around here, has actually had to embrace it pretty fast and get through the past 7 months. I think initially people felt a loss of control. And I remember chatting to a friend of mine who's a chief operating officer of a small company, and they didn't do any working from home before the pandemic. And he told me proudly after lockdown that he'd basically purchased Zoom for his organisation, and he was encouraging everyone to work with their cameras on all day. I was kind of horrified at the thought of this, and I realised how he was using it. Hopefully now he's recognised the importance of focusing on outputs and deliverables versus seeing people sat at their desks at home. But one thing that can work well is to find a way to involve people in the change you're trying to implement, so they have some feeling of control over the situation and a sense that they're able to influence it. So at the moment, workplaces up and down the country are trying to work out what office space they need in the future. Why do we need office space? When do we need it? How would we use it? And a lot of organisations are reaching out to their employees and trying to survey them for thoughts to enable them to plan better for the next 18 months. In the simple desk move example that I shared earlier, Perhaps rather than just announce a desk move, we could ask for volunteers to contribute to the project. Think about whether everyone still needs a fixed desk, or could there be some hot desking, for instance? That again gives people the opportunity to contribute to the process. A recent example I heard was an organisation who, when lockdown happened, gave their staff the option to retrospectively complete timesheets. So when they suddenly had children at home with them and they really were, like many people, bewildered by how they were going to get their jobs done, they were given the option, rather than have to reduce their hours up front, they could feel in more control of their working time and report back on what work they'd been able to do, and actually whether there needed to be any sort of reduction in their pay or whether they were delivering everything. It was less of a feeling of having something taken away from them. So what has changed in this context is the challenge of building in relatedness, i.e. trust, and autonomy when we're more distant than ever, and all working virtually in the main. In the context of COVID, what's the equivalent of a handshake or an informal water cooler or kitchen conversation? Whatever the solution that works for your teams, remember, being human and being yourself is absolutely critical. Just because we can't shake hands or make in-person eye contact as much, there are many things we can still do to build that human connection with others. Maybe it's just adding 5 minutes at the start of a meeting for an informal check-in in a one-to-one. Or with my team, we open the virtual meeting room 15 minutes before the meeting starts. So for those who've got time and would like to, there's a space for informal conversation and chit chat. Communicating with your camera on, but also reacting to others with their camera on. That makes me laugh, because obviously we're in a webinar where you guys can't do that for me. But I think when we're in meetings with our team members, it's absolutely important that they can see and hear our reactions. Sending a message of support maybe after a large group meeting. So maybe you've got an individual in your team who's presented, and because you can't chat to them on the way back to your desk, just making sure that you acknowledge what's just happened, whether you call them quickly or you send them a text. Remembering significant dates and acknowledging them. I try to remember birthdays and work anniversaries and give people some recognition when those happen. And perhaps, putting something in the post. We could go back to old school. I know I had this idea of putting lots of things in the post during lockdown, and I've only managed it once with my team, so I'm being honest with you all, but I sent everybody a card probably 4 or 5 months into lockdown, thanking them for, keeping going through what was a really difficult time. All of these things will boost oxytocin, which is crucial for helping us feel connected. Finally, before we sum up today, I just wanted to remind you of a really common misconception about change, which is that transition is about accepting a new way that is a compromised situation. The transition is tough, but the new way often isn't a poor or a negative result. And our own experience of working with a variety of leaders this year, some in healthcare, we've sort of started to capture some of their thoughts and some of the positive impacts that 2020 has brought them. So whilst no one needs reminding that, the last 6 months have proved that 9 out of 10 people were right in the change poll, change is definitely present in our future lives. There are a number of things we might have not predicted 6 months ago. People are learning how to do work disparately and with far less oversight than before. Systemic changes. So for instance, workplaces who viewed working from home with suspicion, we don't do that round here, had to just navigate to it quickly and get everyone doing it. The same with GP appointments. They went from always being face-to-face, appointments to phone bookings over the course of a weekend. Ironically, in the midst of social distancing, I think many of us feel we're getting closer as we really focus in on the people we want to connect with and who is most important to us. We're connecting with purpose rather than just randomly. So interactions are more meaningful when we have them because we have to put more effort into them. And teams have become more adaptable and agile just from necessity. All of this is a reminder of our earlier point about change and transition. COVID has triggered the external changes, the working from home, wearing PPE, the things that are different about our environment. But the transition has been a really emotional one. So as we find our new way amongst those external changes, be aware that we've all been on that journey. Sigmund Freud stated that change is often difficult as it is not because people fear the unknown, they fear leaving the known. This is a phrase to really lean on when we're thinking or communicating new projects and ways of working. We don't fear the new, we're scared to let go of what we know. Whilst the status quo might not be perfect or even ideal, we know its strengths and weaknesses, and we're currently making the best of them. The new way brings a whole new set of challenges, ones we aren't equipped to cope with yet. In other words, better the devil you know. So we've got 3 things for you to take away from today. Remember to focus on the transition as much as the change. So the change is moving the furniture. The transition is the emotional change that needs to happen underneath that. Plan everything with the theory of change tools. So don't forget the role of project management is in successful change activity. It needs to be there. Target hearts and minds with SCARF, the importance of communication to successfully lead change. And we'll share those SCARF tips with you after today. Now let's move on to the Q&A. There's some of the websites that we'll share with you when we share the deck later. And I believe we may have had a few questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Steph. That was so interesting. I think loads of food for thought there for people. So we've got 4 questions so far that have been submitted, but everyone's got any additional ones, please do put those in. And also you can vote for your favourite questions by putting thumbs up. So at the top of the list, Steph, we have got, how do you identify change advocates?
Oh, that's a great question. So I guess it's really important to differentiate between the people you've got who understand the rationale for the change and from those who are actually excited and inspired by it. And I think what you'll see is the latter group will really lean into the conversations. You know, they'll be proactive and they'll positively engage with others in a discussion about the change. So they'll be really good at, you know, informally dropping it into conversations because actually they can see the opportunity that might come from it. And I think in my experience, they often make themselves known to us. So it's just making sure we make time for them. You know, they kind of perhaps ask lots of questions during a briefing and, you know, they may come and ask for time with us one-to-one. And, you know, I guess another way is to sort of, if you're really not sure who they are, maybe to ask people in your network who they think could be your advocates, maybe who are closer to the group that you're communicating with. Especially when it's a large scale change program, you need people who can help you, you know, connect you with those individuals.
Great, thank you. The next one, how do you measure when change has been successful?
Yeah, it's a really good one, and it's hard because there are often lots of layers to change programs and projects, and it can feel kind of almost never ending with you know, the end state constantly evolving. It's like, I don't think anyone ever feels they get there and you kind of tie a bow on it and the change is over. You know, we kind of move probably into another change program, I think is what most of us in organisational life know. It's important though to sort of try and think about it first. And when I'm working with an organisation and actually we're building development and transformation programs, I will often ask, what do you want to see has changed after this intervention? And if I'm really honest, most customers will often say to me, I'm not sure. That's a good question. And that's because it is a tricky question to answer, but it's one that we need to explore. Because if we can, you know, really start with the end in mind, we're much more likely to achieve that goal and know where we're heading towards. The other thing you could do in an organisational setting with like large scale change is maybe hold some focus groups or maybe some sort of temperature check type surveys, like pulse surveys, to measure the impact the change has had on people's behaviours and sort of mindsets. And I guess if you embark on these types of activities, it can be really interesting holding them before the change has occurred and then during the transition and then afterwards. So don't forget to kind of collect your data all the way along the journey, because it enables you to, I suppose, get a sort of sense of where you are, but then also you could change your approach, Holly. So, you know, it might be that you realise actually it's not going quite as I hoped, I need to do something else, and you can make that change.
Yeah, really interesting. I think that's a great point about does it ever end?
Yeah.
One change programming to another. So this person's now asking, how do you manage a leader who isn't giving you what you need during a period of change?
Yeah, that's tricky. And I think it can be really hard when you feel that you're not getting what you need there. And I guess the context here is probably important. I suppose if it's a leader we've got access to, we could think about giving them feedback, which I know probably heightens everyone's anxiety on the call the minute I say that. But, you know, is there a way that we can share with them the impact of their communication style? So, you know, there's been so much going on recently, and you know, I'm just not clear from the announcement what that means for me at the moment. So trying to get clarity there. I suppose also trying to appreciate whether they've got the answers themselves. I think a lot of leaders really struggle to be open that they maybe don't, they've got to say, I don't know. And it takes a lot of courage to say, I don't know. And the other thing that I think can happen along with that is that we say, I don't know, and we say, quite often we'll make commitments as to when we're going to get back to people. And what I've seen happen before, Holly, is that often we say, oh, you know, we'll come back to you and we'll be in touch in 2 weeks' time. But we haven't got the answer in 2 weeks' time. So we think, oh, I think I'll leave that, just let it slip out the diary, won't put it in, you know. But actually, in my experience, it's much better to call that meeting and say, I'm going to be honest, I don't have that answer yet. This is where I'm at. Because then you're meeting that commitment you've made. You might not have been able to get the information, but you've been honest and open. And that's going to keep that sense of relatedness with them.
Yeah, definitely. So the last question that we have, probably again very relevant given our current situations, what's the best way to manage change when everyone is fatigued?
Oh yeah, exhausting, isn't it? And it's tough because it's our new reality at the moment. You know, we're having to kind of embrace agility constantly. And there are, I suppose, fewer certainties than ever have been before. And just the fact that I think none of us feel like we can plan anything personally, let alone work-wise, is kind of feels exhausting. So I guess we're having to acclimatise into this kind of new world. And for some of us, it's more exhausting maybe than others. And it feels kind of more sort of wearing and relentless. There are some of us, though, who may be exhilarated by it. And transitions will be short for some people and for others much longer. And it will partly depend on the change, partly depend on the person. So I think adapting our style to each person and supporting them on the journey, you know, one size doesn't fit all. And I think also it's really important that we know and understand each person in our team and what their view is of the new normal. So this is where using some of the coaching questions we've talked about in previous webinars can be really helpful, because just getting a sense of where people are at now and then checking in again a week or two later is really useful. I'm definitely noticing in all of my one-to-ones that people are just on this kind of up and down journey. And, you know, I kind of feel like someone's turned a corner and then the next time I engage with them, they're flat again. And so it's really just trying to keep that continuous dialogue going. None of us can change the globe. Well, there are people at NIHR who might be able to change the global pandemic, but I know I can't. So I'm working on the basis of living within it and how we can help people really, you know, embrace this new normal.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of the questions, Steph, and therefore the end of the webinar. Thank you again. I think really interesting, lots of practical tips there, and hopefully people have found it valuable and can go away and put some of that stuff in practice. I hope everybody watching has enjoyed the webinar and feel able to apply that learning to their own situations and experiences. And if you have enjoyed this webinar, you can find all of our past webinars on the NIHR TV YouTube channel under the Development and Support Webinars playlist. So from both of us, thank you so much for your time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.